maybe she knew a little bit of something, but she filed for divorce to make it look like she didn't know. Hey y'all, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so I did my nails as we wait so patiently. It's been about 2 weeks since I last did my nails, and I was really hoping that I could make it to doing this video before they start popping off, because one by one I thought they was gonna go, but they didn't. So yeah, I'm probably gonna take them off after I do this video because I've been dying to do them again, but I really want y'all to see these because I think they're so cute. And before we hop into today's case, I just want to tell everybody happy Juneteenth. I'm recording this on Sunday, and so it'll be up for y'all tomorrow on Monday on Juneteenth. And real quick, I did not know that a lot of people, especially black people, did not know what Juneteenth was until like 2 years ago and or last year when they made it a federal holiday. I did not know that. I've been celebrating Juneteenth my whole life. In Milwaukee, we have this Juneteenth Day parade that be happening, and then we have Juneteenth Festival. I mean, it's like a little block party or whatever. And we used to go every single year when I was a kid, and even into my teenage years, like I would go. But as I grew into an adult, I stopped going because people started getting reckless. But again, I just didn't know that a lot of black people didn't know what Juneteenth was. But I'm glad y'all know now. Alright, so let's get into the case. And today we're going to be talking about Richard Merritt. But before we talk about Richard Merritt, we got to talk about his homeboy, Mick Malvo. And Mick Malvo is a successful marketing executive from Louisiana who decided that he wanted to take a little bit of a break from marketing so that he could focus on his writing. Now, I don't know what kind of writing he was about to try to do, but whatever it was, he was trying to get into his creative bag. And in order to tap into his creativity, he wanted a change of scenery. So he wanted to get out of Louisiana. And so he ended up moving to Nashville, Tennessee. But seeing as how he wasn't working in marketing at the time and his writing projects wasn't quite done yet, or maybe not even started, I really don't know. But he needed some money. So he decided that he was going to find just a regular 9-to-5 that wasn't taking up so much of his time, something that he could go to, and then once he left, he could put all his focus into his writing. And he ended up finding a job at a bar called Betty's as a bartender. So he was pretty much working at night. And so throughout the day, he would focus on his writing, and then at night, he would be able to go to the bar, make his little money. But the whole routine of just going to work at night and then writing during the day, it was kind of getting a little bit mundane for Mick. He wanted some type of companionship, some type of partnership. I mean, he was living with one of his cousins in Nashville, but he had been there for a couple of months, and his cousin, I mean, while that was some sort of companionship, he wanted something romantic. So in July of that same year, he would go on a dating app and he would meet a girl named Kelly. And him and Kelly, they started off by sharing information about one another with each other. And Mick pretty much told her his life story about how he had previously been married, but he is no longer married, and that he and his ex-wife, they at some point were expecting a child, but unfortunately she did lose the baby. And outside of the one baby that his wife lost, he does not have any more children. So Mick and Kelly talked for about 3 weeks online before they decided to meet in person. And once they finally did meet, they hit it off. They hit it off just as good as they did online in person. Like, there was not a beat missed, nothing skipped. Like, Mick was who he portrayed himself to be online, Kelly was who she portrayed herself to be online, and the two of them hit it off really, really well. And so they started dating. And as the two of them started talking more and seeing each other more, Mick would start spending less and less time in his cousin's house and more time at Kelly's house. And over the next 2 months or so, it seemed like Mick was spending more time at Kelly's house than he was at his cousin's house. And it seemed like he had kind of just moved himself right on in. Now the thing is, him and Kelly had talked about moving in with each other and getting their own place together, but Kelly was more under the impression that it was like and eventually as the relationship goes on, not so much a right now I'm packing all my stuff up and I'm coming to stay with you. That was just a little bit more than what Kelly had bargained for at the time, because she was like, look, we have only been dating for about 2 months. We talked about this, but I thought we was gonna, you know, figure something out where we found our place together, moved in together, where both of us was on the lease and both of us was paying rent. Because at this time, Mick had kind of slowly moved himself in, but he wasn't chipping in. He was not paying no rent. He was kind of just mooching at this point. And Kelly was like, hold on, sir. Once she kind of realized this, she was just like, pump your brakes, Mick. Pump your brakes. So when Kelly brought this up to Mick and was like, listen, this is a little bit more than what I bargained for. You gonna have to go back to your cousin's house. Mick wasn't having it. I'm not necessarily that he wasn't having it, but he kind of like freaked out, and he pretty much told her that he cannot go back to his cousin's house. But you see, the thing about it is that Kelly wouldn't have to worry about Mick for too much longer, because on September 30th, 2019, Mick Malvo will be arrested. Because y'all, Mick Malvo is not Mick Malvo at all. No. Mick Malvo is Richard Merritt, the guy that this case is about. When Richard was arrested, he had been on the run for the past 8 months. So now that we got Richard's double life out the way, let's talk about who he really is. Richard Merritt, I didn't too much go into depth on his background because, quite frankly, I really didn't give a shit. And secondly, there was not a lot of information to be found about him. I mean, maybe there was, but I didn't dig that deep. So I really don't know too much about Richard. What I do know is that his mom's name is Shirley Merritt and his dad's name was Robert Merritt. He has an older brother whose name is also Robert. And from everything that I can gather, he had a pretty normal childhood. His parents was married from before he was born until his dad passed away. And in 2018, Richard was a lawyer who had actually been married for the past 19 years and had 2 children, contrary to what he told Kelly. His wife's name was Janine, and the two of them met while they was in college. And like I said, they were going to have 2 kids. And by all accounts, they seemed to be the quintessential American family. He was a lawyer. She was a doctor. They had 2 kids. They probably had a dog. I really don't know. But y'all get what I'm saying. A doctor, a lawyer. Janine and Richard were living well, okay? Now, from everything that I could gather, Richard's mom, Shirley, played a really big role in Janine and Richard's lives. Because before they were doctors and lawyers, they were broke college students. And Richard, he didn't have the jobs rolling in as soon as he got out of college. And Janine was a year behind him, so she was still in school once he graduated. And like I said, he wasn't quite employed yet. And so his mom, she helped him and Janine financially to get over that, like, after college graduation hump, if you will. She even helped them buy their first house. Shirley was the definition of a doting, caring, loving, supportive mother. Once Richard and Janine had kids, she was the same way towards her grandkids. Wasn't missing no soccer games, wasn't missing no recitals, was there at the drop of a dime whenever they needed her to watch the kids. Like, Shirley was that grandma and that mom, okay? Y'all know the type to do literally anything for her kids and her grandkids. So after Richard got on his feet and he started working for a firm and decided that he didn't want to work for nobody no more and that he wanted to open up his own firm, Shirley didn't have no problem helping him finance this. She literally gave him the money to open his own practice. Like, here, son, here's $100,000. I don't know how much it costs to open up or start a law practice, but she gave him the money to start his own law practice because, again, she was that type of mom. So Richard opens up his own practice and everything seems to be going well within this practice. And even though Richard's practice looked like it was doing well, it really wasn't. And I really don't think that it was because it couldn't have been a successful practice, but the thing about it was Richard was scamming and scheming on his clients, and more in particular, the elder ones. He has stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from multiple of his clients. And this was seemingly unbeknownst to his family and friends. Janine, his brother, his mama, none of them had any idea that he was doing this. They thought, just like everybody else thought, that Richard's practice was legit. Now, just because Richard's family wasn't looking at him sideways, don't mean that nobody was looking at him sideways. And I don't know how they figured it out, who came to the conclusion, who started putting two and two together. I don't know. But what I do know is that on January 31st, 2018, Richard was arrested on fraud charges. And no sooner than them bars slammed on Richard, Janine was down at that courthouse, baby, filling out paperwork to get a divorce. Literally 5 days after Richard was arrested, Janine filed for divorce. Like, she wanted no parts in none of the stuff that was happening. And that makes me think that maybe she did know a little something. Maybe she knew a little bit of something, but she filed for divorce to make it look like she didn't know. Like, to make it seem like she was shocked and appalled. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did this. You know? But I don't know for real though. So remember I told y'all that Shirley was the type of mama who was gonna go hard for her boys and her grandkids, and she was like ride or die, right? So after Richard was arrested, he went to a bond hearing where his bail was set at $400,000. And you know you gotta put 10% down, which would be $40,000. So Shirley, I mean, she didn't just have $40,000 sitting in the bank. So what she did was she put up her house to get the money for Richard to get out of jail. And just like that, Richard was out on bail. With stipulations, of course. And the stipulation was that he had to have on an ankle monitor. He had a curfew. He had to be back at his mom's house at a certain time, because by this time, obviously, Janine has filed for divorce. So when he got out of jail, he's not going back to Janine's house. I know y'all didn't think he was going back there. Miss Shirley let him come back to live with her. So he had a curfew. He had to be back at his mom's house at a certain time, and he couldn't leave before a certain time. He couldn't leave the state, and he had to give permission to do certain stuff if that were to include out-of-state activity or just to be out past his curfew and stuff like that. And over the next year before Richard's plea hearing, he abided by all of the rules that was set forth for him. So he was always in the house on time, and if he wasn't going to be in the house, he would call to get permission or to let them know what was up. He did not leave the state. He didn't try to leave the state, and he literally followed every single rule that was given to him by the court. And throughout this whole time, even though him and Janine was divorced, now they divorce became finalized in June of 2018. Even though they was divorced at this point, like throughout the year where he was on the ankle monitor, Janine would still let him see the kids because he was potentially going to jail for a really long time if he was found guilty of all the charges that he was, convicted of. And so Janine still wanted Richard to still be able to see his kids, especially if he was going to be in jail for the next couple of years, because I had a feeling that Janine was not about to bring the kids to no jailhouse to see Richard. So she wanted them to see him as much as they could before he went to the big house, right? But yeah, so like I said, he pretty much followed all of the rules until his next court appearance in January of 2019. So when Richard go to court in January, he ended up pleading guilty to the charges that he was faced with, which was fraud and elderly abuse. And the judge sentenced him to 30 years in prison, but he had to serve a minimum of 15 before he could even potentially be let out. The judge felt like since Richard's crime was not a violent offense, since he didn't attack nobody, he didn't hurt nobody, and he had followed all of the rules from once he was bonded out until now, the judge felt like, okay, he could give Richard 2 weeks to get his stuff together, get all of his affairs in order, and get everything he needs to get together before he had to turn himself in. So the judge said, get your stuff together, visit with your kids as much as you can in the next 2 weeks, and on February 1st, 2019, by 5 p.m., I need you to be at this jailhouse ready to go to jail. So Richard agreed. Now, the only stipulation, once again, was that Richard was still going to have to be on that ankle monitor, and all the curfews and stuff would still be in place throughout this 2 weeks. And of course, Richard agreed. By this point, he had been doing this for a whole year, so another 2 weeks wasn't going to hurt him, right? So the judge let him go. So once again, for the next 2 weeks, Richard abided by all of the rules of the court. And so his mom, and his mom's cousin-in-law, so Richard's dad's cousin, right? They all created a plan to turn Richard in. So the plan was that Shirley's cousin-in-law, whose name was Mike, would drive from Alabama to Georgia, which was about a 2-hour drive, and he would end up taking Richard to turn himself in while his wife stayed at the house with Shirley, because they felt like it would be too much on Shirley to like turn Richard in and then drive herself home safely. Like, she probably would have to sit in the parking lot for a couple hours before she would be stable enough to drive herself back to her house. And they just didn't want that for her. They really wanted to make this as easy as possible, not only for Richard, but for Shirley as well. And they just knew that the way Shirley feel about her kids, they just felt like it would be a very emotional day for her. And so that's why they came up with the plan that they came up with. However, early in the morning on Friday, February 1st, 2019, Mike would get a text message from Shirley pretty much saying that they didn't need to come and that Shirley would be fine dropping Richard off to the jail. And shortly after Mike got the text message from Shirley, he got another text from Richard pretty much reiterating the same thing, that Shirley will be okay and that Mike and his wife didn't have to come. And so because of these text messages, even though Mike and his wife was already on their way to Georgia, they just busted a U-turn and went back to Alabama because they wanted to respect the wishes of not only Shirley, but of Richard as well. And it wouldn't be until a little bit after 5 p.m. that same day that people started realizing that something wasn't right. Now, I really can't remember who it was who got the phone call, but I do think that it was Janine. And she got a call saying that Richard had not showed up to jail at 5 o'clock like he was supposed to. And that was kind of weird to her because she had just seen Richard that same morning and everything seemed fine. So what happened was Richard wanted to go to a doctor's appointment that their daughter had, because that would be the last time that he saw her before, you know, he went to jail. So Janine saw Richard at the doctor's appointment and everything seemed all good. And so when she got the call saying that he didn't turn himself into jail, she kind of thought it was weird. And so once she got that call, she tried to call Shirley, but Shirley didn't answer the phone. And that was a little bit weird for her too. And so then Janine called Mike because she knew that Mike and his wife was supposed to be coming to Georgia to drop Richard off to jail. And so she wanted to know why Richard wasn't in jail. So when she called Mike, Mike told her about the text that he got. Now, it was at around this same time. I mean, well, not exactly the same time. It was like a little bit before this, around like 5 o'clock and not after 5. So it was around 5 o'clock that a man named Steve Queen would get a notification to his phone saying that Richard's ankle monitor had been tampered with. So Steve Queen was the guy assigned to, I guess, monitor Richard's ankle monitor. So when he got this notification that Richard's ankle monitor had been tampered with, he went to the location that the app said that the ankle monitor should be at. And this was a TNA truck stop. And when he got there, he ended up finding the ankle monitor in a trash can under a pizza box, and Richard was nowhere in sight. The man was on the run at this point. So now back to Janine and Mike. When they started talking and started putting 2 and 2 together, they kind of felt like something wasn't right. The fact that Shirley wasn't answering her phone and the fact that Richard didn't show up to jail, that just didn't sit right with them. And so they decided that they would meet each other at Shirley's house the next morning just to check on her and make sure everything was okay. Mike needed Janine because Janine still had an extra key to Shirley's house. So the next day comes, it's now February 2nd, and Mike and Janine, along with Janine's dad, meet at Shirley's house where Janine gives Mike the key to go in. And so he goes and he opens the door, he checks the whole upstairs, and he doesn't see anything. But except for in the kitchen, he does see a pot of spaghetti on the stove with Shirley's sauce. It kind of looked like she was in the middle of cooking, but it didn't look like it had been served yet. And so he continues on in the house and he starts to go towards the basement. Once he opens the basement door, there's like 2 parts. So you got the little first set of stairs, and then you got the landing, and then you got the second set of stairs. Once he kind of like cut the corner to the landing, that is where he saw Shirley laying at the bottom of the stairs, just motionless. It's at this point where he decided to back on about the house and call the coppers. So once the police arrive and get a closer look at Shirley, they realize that she had been stabbed multiple times and had also been bludgeoned with a 35-pound dumbbell that was nearby, and they pronounced her deceased at the scene. Now, the fact that Richard hadn't turned himself into jail and the fact that Shirley had been found dead in her home just a day after he was supposed to turn himself in, Richard became the number one suspect, okay? But like I told y'all in the beginning, Richard was in Nashville, Tennessee, living under the alias of Mick Malvo, dating Kelly, living his life, not worried about what was going on back in Georgia. Until they found him in September of 2019 and he was promptly arrested. But at this point, they wasn't even worried about the fraud and elderly abuse charges because now he was being arrested for murder. So his trial started in May of 2023, and I think it lasted for about 4 days. And the prosecution pretty much was stating the obvious, saying that he killed his mom and then went on the run. And the defense was pretty much in rebuttal like, nuh-uh, no he didn't. That's not what happened. In my opinion, they didn't really give too much of an alternative until Richard took the stand himself. And when Richard took the stand, he pretty much said that on February 1st, 2019, the day that he was supposed to turn himself in, he went to his daughter's doctor's appointment earlier that day, and then he went back home to his mother's house where she was making him spaghetti because that was his favorite meal that she made for him. And she was pretty much making him a final meal before heading off to jail. And then all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. And so he opens the door. And once he opens the door, there's two men standing there. And one has a gun, and they pretty much held Richard and Shirley at gunpoint. And then at some point they forced Miss Shirley to go into the basement, and one of them grabbed a knife out of her knife block and pretty much stabbed her to death. And then she wasn't dying fast enough for them apparently, and she was still making gurgling noises. And so to finish her off, they picked up the 35-pound dumbbell that was laying over there and hit her with it until she stopped making noises. And once they finished with Miss Shirley, they came to him, showed him a picture of his family, you know, his ex-wife and his children, and was like, if you say anything, they're next. And the whole thing was that they was mad at him for defrauding the elderly and like stealing all their money. So they killed his mama and then threatened his family. And so instead of calling the police, he fled to Tennessee because he was scared that they was going to come for his family. And thankfully, the jury was pretty much just like, bitch, you lying, and found his ass guilty. And I think that he was sentenced to a mandatory life sentence. So he's not getting out of jail. And y'all, while he was on the stand talking about how these intruders kill his mom, he really was so emotionless. I'm trying to insert a clip here for y'all because it was really just outrageous the way he had no emotion. He wasn't crying, he wasn't sad. It was really just like a matter of fact, straightforward type of thing. And I was just like, sir, like let a little gangster teardrop or something.
And I had just left the kitchen from keeping her company while she was making the spaghetti when I heard a very loud knock at the front door. So I went to the front door and I opened it. And there were two individuals there, two men, and they both were pointing pistols at me. They said, head to the basement and don't say an effing word. The gentleman who pushed her down the stairs put his pistol behind his back into the back part of his jeans. He ran down the stairs, turned the corner, and came back with the 35 pounds weight that has been seen during the course of this trial. Well, the knife came later. This monster took this dumbbell and proceeded to bludgeon my mother right in front of me. I cannot believe what I was seeing. I didn't understand. He stabbed her with such force that the handle broke off the knife. I didn't realize at the time that the knife was still stuck in my poor mother's face. He then turned and looked at me, and he pulled out his cell phone. And he proceeded to show me a picture, and he said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, if you say a single word, they're next.
But yeah, y'all, that's all I have for today's case. Thank you so very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what y'all think about this case in the comment section. And I will see you all in the next one. I knew one of y'all was going to do that as soon as I started filming. Yes, baby.
Hey.
You want to say hi too?
Hello.
All right. And in order to tap into his creativity, he decided that he wanted to, And in order to tap into his creativity, he wanted to change. And he ended up finding a job at a bar called Betty's. And he ended up finding a bar. No. Throughout the day, he would work and focus. And so they talked to, and the two, and Shirley, no, and Janine. And as the two of them started talking, no. And as the two of them started seeing, no. And as the two of them started what?